Shocking divorce drama. She took it all. But our daughter chose me over her lies. My name is Mark Davis, and until about a year ago, I thought I had a life most people would envy. A stable job, a nice home in a quiet neighborhood, and a family I cherished. My wife Amanda and I had been together for 15 years, and we had a 16-year-old daughter named Haley, who was the center of my world. Sure, things weren't perfect, whose life is? But I thought we were solid. Amanda and I had built what I believed was a partnership, a team. But it turned out I was playing the game alone, and she'd been working from a completely different playbook. It started with little things. Amanda had always been career-driven, working long hours as a lawyer at a top-tier firm. I respected that about her, admired her ambition, even. But somewhere along the line, those late nights became more frequent, and her energy around the house shifted. She was suddenly more distant, guarded in a way I couldn't put my finger on. When I asked about her day, she'd give me vague answers, like she was reading from a script. I chalked it up to stress from work. After all, lawyers have it tough, right? One night, Haley came into the living room while I was watching TV. "Dad, Mom's been acting weird lately," she said, sitting down next to me. She was chewing on her lip, something she always did when she was nervous. She's always on her phone, like, constantly. And I don't think she knows I've noticed, but she's always smiling when she's texting someone. It's different. First, I waved it off. "Your mom's just busy, Haley. Don't overthink it." But her words stuck with me. That same night, I glanced over at Amanda while she sat on the other side of the couch, her face lit by the glow of her phone. She was smiling. A small, private smile I hadn't seen in years. My stomach twisted in a way I couldn't explain. I asked her what was so funny, and she quickly locked her phone and shrugged. "Just a work thing," she said, brushing it off as if I were crazy for even asking. That was the moment I started to feel the cracks in the foundation of our marriage. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I had no reason to suspect anything. But the signs kept piling up. Late-night calls she wouldn't explain, dinners she suddenly had to attend, and a growing sense of detachment that hung over us like a cloud. I was losing my wife, and I didn't even know why. Then I found out. It was a Saturday morning, and Amanda had gone out to run errands. I was cleaning up the kitchen when her laptop dinged with a new email. I never snooped before, never had a reason to, but something about that sound made my heart race. The email was from someone named Eric, and the subject line read, "Last night." Against my better judgment, I clicked on it. What I read felt like a punch to the gut. Eric wasn't just a colleague. He was one of several men Amanda had been messaging, and these weren't innocent work-related emails. They were explicit, intimate, the kind of things you can't unsee once you've read them. The texts, the photos, the late-night meetings, it was all there, laid out in front of me like the script to a bad movie. And Eric wasn't the only one. There were others. I was too stunned to cry, too numb to scream. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling the weight of 15 years crumble beneath me. When Amanda came home later that afternoon, I confronted her. She didn't deny it. She didn't even try to explain. She just stood there, her arms crossed, her face unreadable. "Mark, we've been over for a long time," she said, her voice cold and distant. "You just didn't want to see it." The divorce was swift and brutal. Amanda's lawyers tore through me like vultures picking a carcass clean. Every detail of my life was dragged into the courtroom, twisted, and used against me. The judge handed down a verdict that felt more like a punishment than a resolution. I was ordered to pay $4,000 a month in alimony, another $6,000 in child support and health insurance for Haley until she turned 21, and cover the $15,000 mortgage on the house Amanda got to keep. Over $25,000 a month. For a woman who had betrayed me in every possible way. I tried to fight it. I showed my lawyer the emails, the proof of her infidelity, but it didn't matter. Amanda played her cards perfectly, painting me as a distant husband who had failed her emotionally. The court sided with her, and just like that, everything I'd worked for, everything I'd built was taken away. It wasn't just the financial burden, it was the principle. I was being punished for trying to hold my family together while she was out tearing it apart. But the worst part wasn't the money or the house. It was the look on Haley's face when she realized her mother and I were done. She didn't ask questions, didn't cry, but I could see the pain in her eyes, the way it weighed on her shoulders. I wanted to tell her everything, to show her who Amanda really was, but I couldn't. She was 16, caught in the middle of a war she never signed up for. So, I bit my tongue, paid the bills, and tried to move forward. But the betrayal haunted me. Every time I looked at Haley, I wondered how much of Amanda she'd inherited, how much of her mother's deception was lying dormant, waiting to surface. It was a cruel thought, I know, but when someone you love betrays you so deeply, it changes the way you see the world and everyone in it. This wasn't the life I had signed up for, and as much as I tried to push the bitterness aside, to focus on Haley and what little I had left, I couldn't help but feel like a man who had been stripped of everything. A man left to pay for sins he hadn't committed. After the divorce, I spent weeks drowning in a haze of anger and disbelief. Every time I wrote out a check for alimony or child support, it felt like I was feeding the very person who'd gutted my life. The thought of Amanda enjoying the money I worked so hard to earn, likely while laughing about it with her so-called colleagues, was like rubbing salt into an open wound. But as much as it infuriated me, I still had responsibilities to Haley. I wasn't going to let Amanda's betrayal derail my role as a father. Still, something about the whole situation felt wrong. Amanda was living in the house I was still paying for, probably sipping wine with the same people she cheated with, while I was holed up in a 2-bedroom apartment, eating takeout and staring at bills that never seemed to end. She had taken almost everything from me, and then the courts had forced me to hand her the rest on a silver platter. At first, I was resigned. I followed the court orders to the letter, sending the money on time, every time, like a good little ex-husband. But the resentment didn't go away. It grew. And then one night, as I stared at yet another alimony payment, something snapped. Why did I have to make her life so easy? Why did she get to win while I was left to pick up the pieces? That was when I decided it was time to play by a different set of rules. You see, one of my businesses is a coin exchange company. We supply small businesses with change for their cash registers, rolls of quarters, bags of nickels, that sort of thing. It's a niche market, but a surprisingly lucrative one. And as I stared at the check I was about to write Amanda, an idea began to form. The next day, I went to one of my warehouses and had my team prepare her alimony payment in the most inconvenient form possible. Coins. Not neat little rolls or bags of quarters that could be easily deposited. No, I was more creative than that. I had them load up massive bags of nickels, each weighing about 50 pounds, and stack them onto a wooden pallet. The amount was precise, down to the cent, but it was delivered in a way that screamed inconvenience. When I showed up at Amanda's doorstep with the first delivery, she looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "What is this, Mark?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain as she eyed the stack of coin bags. "Your alimony?" I replied with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Every single penny, as ordered by the court." She scoffed, crossing her arms. "This is ridiculous. You can't expect me to carry all this to the bank." "Why not?" I said, feigning innocence. "It's legal tender. The court didn't specify how I had to pay you, just that I had to pay. So here it is." It was petty, sure, but seeing her flustered reaction gave me a small, bitter sense of satisfaction. She called me immature, spiteful, and a slew of other names, but none of it mattered. As far as I was concerned, I was still following the rules. The best part? The coins had to be meticulously counted before they could be deposited. It wasn't just a matter of dumping them into a machine. The banks wouldn't accept bulk deposits without verification. It would take her or someone she hired hours to get through it all. But I didn't stop there. Child support was another matter entirely. I'd been paying it through Amanda, but it quickly became clear that she wasn't always using the money for Haley. Expensive haircuts, new designer handbags, and spa days weren't exactly on the list of necessities for a 16-year-old girl. So I found a workaround. I opened a separate account in Haley's name, one that only she could access. Every payment for her maintenance, child support, health insurance, anything related to her well-being, went directly into that account. Amanda couldn't touch a dime of it. If Haley needed something, she could use the money herself, and if Amanda needed reimbursement for any expenses, she'd have to show me the receipts. Of course, Amanda wasn't happy. She called me furious, accusing me of trying to control her and undermine her authority. "You're just trying to make my life harder, Mark," she yelled over the phone.
"No," he replied calmly.
"I'm trying to make sure the money is used for Haley, not your personal shopping spree." Her outrage was predictable, but it didn't faze me. I wasn't doing this to be cruel, though I'd be lying if I said I didn't take a bit of satisfaction in her frustration. The truth was, I just wanted to protect Haley and make sure she had what she needed. At first, Haley didn't say much about the changes. She was a smart girl, though, and it didn't take her long to figure out why things were happening the way they were. One day, she came to me with a hesitant smile. "Thanks for doing this, Dad," she said. "It's fairer, I guess." Hearing that from her meant more than I could put into words. I knew she was caught in the middle, forced to navigate the tension between her parents, but she saw through the chaos and understood my intentions. As for Amanda, she eventually stopped complaining, at least to me, but I knew she hated every second of it. The coin deliveries, the restricted access to child support funds, it all added up to a life far less comfortable than she'd envisioned. It wasn't revenge, exactly. At least that's what I told myself. It was strategy, a way to level the playing field in a game she thought she'd already won. And for the first time since the divorce, I felt like I had a little bit of control over my own life again. Things started unraveling faster than I anticipated. Amanda wasn't about to take my new strategy lying down. The first month of coins and restricted child support payments was enough to push her over the edge. She showed up at court with her legal team, those same lawyer friends she cheated with, and filed a formal complaint. The complaint painted me as vindictive and manipulative, claiming that I was intentionally making her life difficult. Her lawyers framed the coin payments as harassment and argued that the separate account for Haley was a blatant attempt to undermine Amanda's role as a parent. It was all carefully worded, perfectly packaged to make me look like the villain. I wasn't surprised. Amanda had always been good at manipulating situations to her advantage. But I wasn't going to sit there and let her rewrite the narrative. I showed up to the court hearing ready to defend myself. "My payments are on time and accurate," I told the judge, keeping my voice as calm as possible. "There's nothing illegal about how I'm paying alimony. And as for the child support account, it's set up to ensure every dollar is spent on my daughter. That's my responsibility as a father." I thought my argument was reasonable, fair, even, but the judge didn't see it that way. He was older, with a stern expression that looked carved out of stone. From the moment I walked into the courtroom, I could tell he wasn't on my side. "You're using legal obligations as a weapon," he said, his tone heavy with disapproval. "Your behavior is disruptive and, frankly, juvenile." With that, he ruled in Amanda's favor. I was ordered to stop the coin payments immediately and transfer all child support funds directly to Amanda, as originally mandated. To say I was angry would be an understatement, but what happened next is where things really spiraled out of control. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was the months of pent-up frustration, or the way Amanda sat there with that smug smile on her face, acting like she'd won some kind of game. Maybe it was the judge's dismissive tone, as if I were a child being scolded. Whatever the reason, I couldn't hold my tongue. "With all due respect, Your Honor," I began, my voice trembling with anger. "It's pretty clear you're playing along with my wife and her firm. How much are they paying you to make sure everything goes her way?" The words left my mouth before I could stop them, and the courtroom fell into an eerie silence. Amanda's smile vanished, replaced by a look of feigned shock. Her lawyers exchanged glances, no doubt eager to use my outburst against me. The judge's face hardened, and his voice dropped to a low, dangerous tone. "Mr. Davis, do you understand what you've just implied?" I knew I should apologize, backtrack, do anything to soften the blow. But I didn't. I was too far gone, too consumed by the injustice of it all. "I understand perfectly," I said. "And so do you." That was it. The judge's gavel slammed down, and his next words sealed my fate. 9 months in county jail for contempt of court. Effective immediately. I didn't even have time to process what had just happened. Before I knew it, bailiffs were escorting me out of the courtroom, my hands cuffed behind my back. Amanda sat there, stone-faced, watching as I was led away. Jail wasn't as dramatic as you might imagine. It wasn't a maximum security facility, and my sentence was relatively short in the grand scheme of things. But those 9 months felt like an eternity. The days dragged on, each one blending into the next. At first, I was consumed by rage. I replayed the courtroom scene in my head over and over, thinking of all the ways I could have handled it differently. But anger gets exhausting after a while. Eventually, I realized I had 2 choices. I could sit there and wallow in my misery, or I could use the time to plan my next move. I chose the latter. If Amanda and her team thought I was going to roll over and accept defeat, they didn't know me at all. I might have been down, but I wasn't out. Jail gave me something I hadn't had in months. Time. Time to think, to strategize, to rebuild. Every day, I kept myself busy, jotting down ideas on scraps of paper, replaying every interaction I'd had with Amanda and her legal team. I analyzed their tactics, their weaknesses, and started to see cracks in their armor. But revenge wasn't just about evening the score. It was about taking control of my life again. For too long, Amanda had dictated the terms of everything. Our marriage, the divorce, and even my relationship with Haley. That had to end. I spent hours thinking about Haley, too. She was the one thing that kept me grounded, the one reason I couldn't afford to let myself spiral. I promised myself that when I got out, I'd do whatever it took to make sure she was okay, that she didn't have to keep bearing the weight of her parents' broken marriage. The inmates I shared my cell block with weren't exactly friends, but they became an unlikely source of inspiration. Hearing their stories, some full of regret, others defiant, made me realize that setbacks don't have to define you. They can shape you, refine you, even prepare you for the battles ahead. By the time my sentence was up, I wasn't the same man who'd walked into that courtroom. I was sharper, more focused, and ready to reclaim the narrative of my life. Amanda might have won the battle, but the war was far from over. And as I stepped out of that prison gate, breathing in the fresh air for the first time in months, one thing was crystal clear. I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Prison has a way of putting things into perspective. For some, it's a wake-up call, a chance to reflect on their choices and take a hard look at where life went wrong. For me, it was more like an incubation period, a place where my anger and resentment could simmer until I was ready to put them to use. And as it turned out, prison wasn't just a place for reflection. It was a reunion of sorts. I was sitting in the yard one day, trying to keep to myself. Prison isn't exactly the kind of place where you go looking for deep conversations, and I wasn't in the mood to make friends. But then I heard someone call my name, a voice I hadn't heard in decades. "Mark Davis, is that you?" I turned, and there he was, Ronnie. Ronnie Thompson, my childhood partner in crime. Back in the day, Ronnie and I were inseparable. We grew up on the same block, spent our teenage years causing all kinds of trouble, and got into more than a few scrapes together. Then life happened. I went the responsible route, college, marriage, a career, while Ronnie veered down a different path. I hadn't seen him in years, and yet there he was, standing in front of me with the same mischievous grin I remembered. "Ronnie," I said, shaking my head, "what are you doing here?" He laughed. "Probably the same thing you are, getting screwed over by life." We sat down and started catching up, swapping stories about where life had taken us. Ronnie hadn't changed much. He was still quick with a joke, still had that easy charm that made you want to trust him even when you knew better. But beneath the surface, he'd grown sharper, more calculating. Prison hadn't dulled him, it had refined him. When I told him why I was there, about Amanda and the judge and the whole nightmare of my divorce, he didn't laugh or judge me. He just nodded like he'd seen it all before. "Man, that's rough," he said. "But you know what they say about karma, right? It's only a matter of time before it catches up to everyone." I wasn't interested in waiting for karma, though. I told Ronnie as much, and that's when our conversation took a turn. "You want to make them pay?" he asked, his tone shifting from casual to serious. "More than anything," I said, my voice steady. He leaned back, studying me. "All right then, you're gonna need help. Lucky for you, I know people, People who can make things happen. That's how it started. Ronnie and I spent hours talking, not just reminiscing about the past, but planning for the future. He introduced me to a network of people, some inside the prison, some outside, who specialized in the kind of work I needed done. These weren't your run-of-the-mill troublemakers. They were strategists, hackers, investigators, people who knew how to dig up dirt and make sure it saw the light of day. The plan was simple in theory but intricate in execution. The goal? To dismantle the reputations of everyone who had wronged me. Amanda, her colleagues, and even the judge who had sent me to prison. Amanda was the easiest target. Her life was already a house of cards, built on lies and deceit. All it took was a little push in the right places to make it collapse. Ronnie's people dug into her personal life, uncovering secrets even I hadn't known about. Affairs with other colleagues, questionable financial dealings, and a pattern of manipulating situations to her advantage. It was all there, waiting to be exposed. Her colleagues weren't much better. Turns out Amanda's circle of lawyer friends wasn't exactly squeaky clean. Ronnie's network found evidence of shady backroom deals, bribes, and even some borderline illegal activities they'd been involved in. The kind of stuff that would make headlines if it ever got out. As for the judge, that was trickier. But Ronnie had a saying, "Everybody's got skeletons in their closet. You just have to know where to look." And sure enough, the judge had his fair share. Campaign donations from questionable sources, a history of biased rulings, and a connection to Amanda's firm that was deeper than he let on. The more we uncovered, the clearer it became that these people weren't untouchable. They just thought they were. Ronnie was instrumental in pulling it all together. He had connections I couldn't even dream of, and he knew how to get people to do what needed to be done. "You just have to know how to talk to people," he'd say with a grin, though I suspected it was more about leverage than charm. But it wasn't just about the dirt we found, it was about how we used it. Timing was everything. If we played our cards too early, they'd have time to cover their tracks. Too late, and the impact would be diminished. We had to strike at just the right moment, when the fallout would be most devastating. By the time my sentence was over, the plan was in place. Ronnie and I shook hands on my last day, and he gave me a wink. "Go get him, Mark," he said. "And don't forget who helped you when this all goes down." "I won't," I promised. As I walked out of those prison gates, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was anger, of course, but also a sense of clarity. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was in control. Amanda and her cronies had underestimated me, but they were about to learn the hard way that I wasn't someone they could walk all over. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, about leveling the playing field in a game they thought they'd already won. And with Ronnie's help, I was finally ready to play. When I walked out of prison, I was a different man. The world I'd left behind wasn't the same as the one I was stepping back into, and neither was I. I wasn't just angry anymore, I was focused. The time I'd spent behind bars wasn't wasted. It was preparation. Every conversation with Ronnie, every scrap of information we'd pieced together, had built toward one singular goal: revenge through exposure. Amanda and her circle had crafted their reputations carefully. They were polished professionals, pillars of the legal community, and untouchable in their own minds. But Ronnie and I knew the truth, and now it was time to show the world exactly who these people really were. The plan started with infiltration. Ronnie's network had people everywhere: cleaners, IT staff, even temporary assistants who could blend into Amanda's office without raising suspicion. These weren't just hired hands. They were professionals who knew how to stay invisible while collecting the evidence we needed. The first big break came from a janitor who worked the late shift at Amanda's firm. He had access to places most people didn't, including private offices and conference rooms. Using a small, concealed camera, he recorded conversations and meetings that should have been behind closed doors. The things he captured were damning: whispers of backroom deals, hints of bribery, and, most importantly, blatant admissions of misconduct from Amanda and her colleagues. But the real goldmine came from a temp secretary Ronnie had placed in the firm. She was sharp, unassuming, and perfect for the job. She had access to emails, calendars, and even confidential files Amanda thought were secure. It didn't take her long to uncover records of Amanda's extramarital affairs with clients, questionable financial transactions, and meetings with politicians that weren't as innocent as they seemed. One particular video stood out. It showed Amanda and a local politician meeting in what they must have thought was a private office. The conversation started with vague references to campaign contributions and legal favors, but it quickly escalated into outright talk of bribes. The politician promised to push a few things through in exchange for Amanda's firm providing discreet services. It wasn't just Amanda. Her entire network of colleagues was tangled up in this web of corruption. There were videos of them discussing how to manipulate cases, overbill clients, and sidestep legal regulations. Each new piece of evidence was more incriminating than the last, and the picture it painted wasn't just ugly, it was criminal. Once we had everything we needed, the next step was to release it. This wasn't just about destroying Amanda's reputation. It was about making a statement. These people had thought they were above the rules, untouchable. I wanted them to feel the same sense of helplessness they'd forced on me. We created an online platform, simple but effective. It featured a slogan that couldn't be ignored: "Don't mess with Mark." The site was anonymous, hosted on servers that couldn't be traced back to us. Every piece of evidence we had, videos, emails, financial records, was uploaded in carefully organized categories. There was a section for Amanda, a section for her colleagues, and even a section for the politicians who had worked with them. Then we launched it. The response was immediate and explosive. The videos went viral within hours, spreading across social media like wildfire. News outlets picked up the story, and within days it was all anyone could talk about. Amanda's face was plastered across headlines, her name tied to scandal after scandal. High-profile lawyer exposed in corruption ring. Videos reveal bribes, misconduct, and affairs at prominent law firm. Local politician implicated in legal bribery scandal. The fallout was catastrophic. Amanda was fired from her job within a week, the firm scrambling to distance itself from her as the scandal grew. Her colleagues weren't spared either. Several of them resigned, while others faced investigations into their practices. The politicians weren't untouchable either. One by one, they were forced to answer for their involvement. Some tried to deny it, but the videos didn't lie. Careers that had taken decades to build crumbled in a matter of days. As for Amanda, she tried to fight back, claiming the videos were doctored and the accusations were baseless. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the court of public opinion had already made up its mind. She became a pariah, her name synonymous with deceit and corruption. For me, it was a bittersweet victory. Watching her fall wasn't as satisfying as I thought it would be, but it brought a sense of closure I hadn't felt in years. I hadn't just taken back control. I'd shown Amanda and everyone else that actions have consequences. The slogan, "Don't mess with Mark," became something of a cultural phenomenon. People wore it on t-shirts, turned it into memes, even used it as a rallying cry for exposing corruption in their own communities. It was ironic, really. I hadn't set out to become a symbol of justice, but somehow that's exactly what had happened. And yet, through it all, my focus remained on Haley. She was the only part of my old life that still mattered, and I wanted to make sure she understood why I'd done what I did. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about standing up for what's right, about showing her that no one has the right to take advantage of you and get away with it. In the end, Amanda lost everything she'd fought so hard to take from me. And while I knew I couldn't get back the years I'd lost, I could finally look in the mirror and feel like myself again. I'd been through hell, but I'd come out the other side stronger, smarter, and ready to rebuild the life I deserved. Haley was the one thing that kept me grounded through everything. Even when the world seemed hell-bent on breaking me, she was my constant, a reminder of the good that still existed in my life. Despite everything Amanda had done, Haley never wavered in her support for me. She saw the truth, and that mattered more than anything else. After the fallout from the scandal, Haley's relationship with Amanda grew increasingly strained. It wasn't hard to see why. Amanda had been exposed as a liar and a manipulator, and the trust between mother and daughter was shattered. Haley wasn't the type to yell or start arguments, but her silence said everything. She stopped talking to Amanda unless it was absolutely necessary, and even then, her answers were clipped and emotionless. One evening, Haley came to me while I was cleaning up after dinner. She'd been quiet all day, and I could tell something was weighing on her. "Dad," she said softly, sitting down at the kitchen table, "I need to talk to you about something." I set the dish towel down and sat across from her, giving her my full attention. "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" She hesitated, chewing on her bottom lip, a habit she'd had since she was little. Finally, she looked me in the eye and said, "I don't want to live with Mom anymore." I blinked, caught off guard. "Haley, that's a big decision. Are you sure?" She nodded, her expression resolute. "I've been thinking about it for a while. She's not the same person I grew up with, Dad. I can't trust her anymore. And honestly, I'm tired of pretending everything's okay when it's not." Hearing her say that broke my heart, but I understood. Amanda had made her bed, and now she was lying in it. Still, I didn't want Haley to make such a life-changing decision lightly. "You know this won't be easy, right?" I said gently. "The court might not make it simple, and it'll take some work to make it happen." She smiled faintly, a flicker of the determination I admired so much in her. "I know, but I've already started looking into it." It turned out that Haley had been working with her school counselor for weeks, researching how emancipation worked and what she needed to do. The counselor, Mrs. Taylor, had been a godsend. She helped Haley understand the legal process, gather the necessary paperwork, and even wrote a letter of recommendation to the court, vouching for Haley's maturity and ability to live independently. "I've got everything ready," Haley said, pulling out a neatly organized folder from her backpack. "I just need your signature." I flipped through the documents, my chest tightening as I realized how much thought she'd put into this. It wasn't just an impulsive decision. This was something she truly wanted. There was one detail that caught my eye. "You listed the old house as your residence," I said, glancing up at her. She nodded. "Yeah, you transferred it to me when you moved out, remember? It's technically mine now." I had almost forgotten about that. After the divorce, I'd signed the deed to my first house over to Haley, thinking it might come in handy for her someday. I never imagined she'd use it so soon, but now it seemed like the perfect solution. Once the paperwork was filed, things moved quickly. Amanda was furious when she found out. She tried to fight it, claiming that Haley was being manipulated by me and didn't understand what she was doing. But Haley stood her ground. At the court hearing, she spoke with a confidence that made me proud beyond words. "I love my mom," Haley said, her voice steady, "but I can't live with her anymore. I need space to figure out who I am without all the chaos. I'm not doing this to hurt her. I'm doing this because it's what's best for me." The judge listened, and in the end, he sided with Haley. She was granted emancipation, and just like that, she was free. The day she moved into the old house was bittersweet. I helped her pack up her things and settle in, making sure everything was in working order. The house was modest but cozy, and I could see her excitement as she started unpacking. "You're really doing this," I said, smiling as she set up her desk in what used to be my old office. She grinned. "Yeah, feels good, you know? Like I can finally breathe." Haley returned to her old school, the one near the house, and quickly fell into a routine. She was thriving in ways I hadn't seen in years, joining clubs, making friends, and focusing on her future. She even got a part-time job at a local bookstore to help cover her expenses. Every time I visited, I was reminded of why I'd fought so hard. Haley's happiness was worth every ounce of effort, every sleepless night, and every sacrifice. She was growing into the kind of person I always knew she could be: strong, independent, and unshakable. As for Amanda, she tried to salvage what was left of her relationship with Haley, but it was too little, too late. Haley wasn't cruel. She still called her mom from time to time, but the bond they once had was gone. Watching Haley rebuild her life reminded me that, no matter how much you lose, there's always a chance to start over. She was proof that resilience runs in our family, and I couldn't have been prouder to call her my daughter. Through all the chaos and heartbreak, Haley and I had come out stronger. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Walking out of those prison gates felt surreal. 10 months felt like a lifetime, yet the world outside kept moving without me. The crisp air hit my face as I stepped out, a free man with more clarity than I'd ever had. I had spent those months preparing for this moment, not just for revenge or rebuilding my life, but for reclaiming the parts of myself I had lost in the chaos. The first thing I wanted to see was Haley. Over the months, her letters had kept me grounded. She wrote about her life in the old house, how she loved her job at the bookstore, and the new friends she'd made. Every word reminded me of why I had fought so hard and endured so much. She had blossomed into a young woman who was fiercely independent and full of potential. When I arrived at her house, she was waiting for me on the porch, grinning ear to ear. "Dad," she called, running down the steps to throw her arms around me. I hugged her tightly, my chest swelling with pride. "Hey, kiddo, look at you, running your own life like a pro." She laughed. I had a good teacher. Walking into that house was like stepping into a time capsule. It still smelled faintly of the furniture polish Amanda used to obsess over, but the place had Haley's personality stamped all over it now. Books were stacked on every surface, and photos of her friends and small, quirky decorations gave it a warmth I hadn't felt in years. We spent hours catching up, talking about her plans for college and her dream of becoming a writer. She was happy, truly happy, and it was the first time in a long while that I felt like everything might actually be okay. Then came the inevitable. It was about a week after I got out when Amanda called. I hesitated before answering, but curiosity got the better of me. "Mark," she began, her voice unusually soft. "I heard you're out. I thought we should talk." "Talk about what, Amanda?" I said, keeping my tone even. There was a pause, the kind of silence that hangs heavy with unspoken regret. "About everything. About Haley, about us, about how things ended." I sighed, already regretting picking up the call. "Amanda, there is no us. There hasn't been for a long time. And as for Haley, she's doing just fine without your input. So what exactly is there left to talk about?" "I made mistakes," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "Big ones. I know that now. But I thought maybe we could." "Stop," I interrupted, cutting her off. "Don't finish that sentence. Whatever you're hoping for, it's not going to happen. I'm moving on, Amanda. You should too." She tried to respond, but I hung up before she could. It felt good to finally shut that door, to let her know that whatever power she once held over me was gone. And then there was Cassandra. I had met her briefly before my time in prison, but it wasn't until after my release that I truly got to know her. Cassandra was Haley's school counselor, the one who had helped her through the emancipation process and supported her when everything was falling apart. Haley had mentioned her in her letters, describing Cassandra as someone who genuinely cared, not just about her job but about the people she helped. When Haley introduced us officially, I immediately saw what she meant. Cassandra was warm and easy to talk to, with a calm, steady presence that made you feel like you could tell her anything. She was in her late 30s, with auburn hair that fell in soft waves and kind, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through you. We started talking more and more, first about Haley and then about life in general. She told me about her passion for helping kids, her love for hiking, and her obsession with baking the perfect apple pie. I found myself opening up to her in ways I hadn't with anyone else, sharing my struggles and fears without feeling judged. One evening, after Haley insisted on hosting a small dinner at her house, Cassandra stayed behind to help clean up. As we worked side by side in the kitchen, I caught myself stealing glances at her, wondering how someone like her could fit into my chaotic life. "Mark," she said, breaking the silence, "I just wanted to say, you've done an incredible job with Haley. She's an amazing young woman." "Most of that's her," I said, smiling. "She's got more strength than I ever gave her credit for." "Maybe," Cassandra said, setting down a dish and looking at me, "but she got it from somewhere." There was something in her tone, something unspoken, that made my chest tighten. I hesitated for a moment before asking, "Would you want to have coffee sometime? Just the two of us?" She smiled, a soft, genuine smile that made me feel lighter than I had in years. "I'd like that." What started as coffee turned into long conversations, hikes in the mountains, and evenings spent cooking together. Cassandra wasn't just a breath of fresh air. She was a reminder that life could be good again, that I didn't have to carry the weight of my past alone. Haley was thrilled when she found out. "Finally," she said, laughing when I told her about Cassandra. "It's about time you let someone new into your life, Dad." For the first time in years, I felt like I had a future worth looking forward to. Amanda was out of the picture, Haley was thriving, and Cassandra brought a sense of peace I hadn't known I needed. It wasn't the life I'd envisioned when I first got married, but maybe that was the point. Life doesn't always go as planned, but sometimes it gives you something even better. As I sat on the porch of Haley's house one evening, watching the sunset with Cassandra by my side, I realized that I wasn't just rebuilding my life, I was living it again. And for the first time in a long time, it felt right. When I walked out of prison after those 10 months, I felt a strange mix of relief and trepidation. The air outside felt lighter, cleaner, but I couldn't shake the weight of everything that had happened. I wasn't sure what kind of life was waiting for me on the other side of those gates. The one thing I did know was that I wasn't the same man who had walked into that courtroom almost a year earlier. The first thing I did was visit Haley. She was the beacon that had guided me through the darkest times, and seeing her thrive made all the pain worthwhile. When I pulled up to the old house, the one I'd once called home, I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. Haley had made it her own, transforming the space into something that reflected her independence and spirit. She greeted me at the door with a wide smile and a tight hug, and for a moment, everything felt right in the world. "You look good, Dad," she said, stepping back to take me in. "Like yourself again." "And you?" I said, smiling as I glanced around the house. "Look like someone who's got everything figured out." She laughed. "Not everything, but I'm getting there." Haley had grown so much in those 10 months, both physically and emotionally. She carried herself with a quiet confidence that made me feel like, despite all the chaos, I'd done something right as a father. She walked me through the house, showing off the changes she'd made. A fresh coat of paint in the living room, a new garden out back, little touches that made it hers. As we sat down for coffee, she told me about her life. Her job at the bookstore, her plans to study psychology, and how she'd finally started to feel like she was in control of her own story. "It's thanks to Mrs. Taylor," she admitted. "She really helped me see that I didn't have to live in Mom's shadow. I could carve out my own path." Mrs. Taylor, or Cassandra, as I'd come to know her, had been a lifeline for Haley. And as I would later learn, she'd been something of a lifeline for me too. It was Haley who first suggested I reach out to Cassandra. "She's been asking about you," Haley said casually one afternoon. "You know, since you got out." At first, I hesitated. What could I possibly offer someone like her? My life was still a mess, and I wasn't sure I was ready for anything more than getting back on my feet. But Haley was persistent, and eventually I gave in. When I met Cassandra again, it was like stepping into a different world. She was warm, kind, and refreshingly straightforward. She didn't pity me, didn't try to sugarcoat anything. She just listened. And for the first time in years, I felt seen, not as the man who had been chewed up and spit out by life, but as someone with value, with potential. We started spending more time together, first under the guise of discussing Haley's progress, and then simply because we enjoyed each other's company. She had this way of making everything feel lighter, of reminding me that even in the rubble, there was something worth rebuilding. As for Amanda, she tried to talk to me a few times after I got out, but I made it clear that we were done. Whatever bond we once had was irreparably broken, and there was nothing more to say. She'd moved on anyway, marrying some wealthy but indifferent lawyer who probably cared more about his status than her happiness. She stayed in her luxurious estate, clinging to the life she'd built on lies, but I wasn't interested in looking back. My focus was on the future. Cassandra and I began building something new together, slowly, deliberately. She understood my scars, didn't try to fix me, but supported me in a way I hadn't realized I needed. With her, I felt like I could finally breathe again, like I could start over without the weight of my past dragging me down. Haley continued to thrive, managing the old house and finding her own way in the world. She'd become a strong, capable young woman. Someone who didn't just survive the storm but came out of it stronger. Seeing her happy, independent, and confident was the greatest reward I could have asked for. I lost a lot in the process. My marriage, my home, even my freedom for a time. But in the ashes of that old life, I found something new. Clarity, purpose, and the people who truly mattered. Amanda could keep her estate, her new husband, and whatever fleeting satisfaction her life brought her. I didn't need it. What I had was far more valuable. A daughter who loved me, a woman who believed in me, and a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. This was the end of one story and the beginning of another. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about rebuilding, about focusing on the things that mattered most. And as I stood in the garden of Cassandra's home, watching the sunset with her hand in mine, I knew I'd finally found the life I was meant to live. This time I wasn't looking back, only forward.